Welcome back, travelers, to Legendary Lore, where today we are doing a special episode of Modern Horizons 2, where we'll be talking specifically about two reprints. All the other episodes have been about actual cards that came out for the first time in this set, barring a few little bits here and there. But most importantly, you have both Chainer and Braids, who were released in different points, of course, in the past, and are being reprinted in Modern Horizons 2. So, we're going to talk about a very abridged version of their story because they literally span like 5 books.
Really?
Yeah, it's close to like 3, but you get the idea. And there's a lot of political intrigue and going back and forth and stuff like that. So I'm just going to kind of give us the big beats. If anyone's actually interested in the Odyssey storyline, some of it was also covered in Kamal and Jessica's story from our first Commander Legends series on Legendary Lore. So let's get into it. So the main thing is that both these guys work for the Cabal, which is what this episode is going to be named. The Cabal Champions is what we named it. So the idea is that this guy is named Mazayura. That is Chainer's real name, while Braid's real name is Bara. And the way the Cabal works is like you lose your real name and you take on your Kabbalist name.
Your minion name.
That said, Chainer's, of course, his nickname. Braids is also her nickname. And that's how their stuff
Been
goes.
lied to this whole time.
We're going to start off with Chainer and talk about how his thing started out, right? So he was born in a tiny little salt flat village kind of thing in Cabal, outskirts of Cabal City. And
he's just a poor boy from a poor family.
While he's there, he basically winds up picking up a phobia of snakes. And so one of the big things about the Cabal is that they love fear. Fear is super important to them, and they use it to basically power up their spells. So while he's there as a kid, he learns how to use chains as weapons, like actual just like chains, like Ghost Rider style chains. And so
Fun.
While he's there, he meets a dementia caster named Minot. And Minot basically suggests that the chain weapon is really weird and you would be great in the pits. So the Cabal, they own this entire block of land, right? And inside of that area is the fighting pits. And people from all over the continent of Ataria come in to actually fight there and see like what they can do, attain glory basically. And so he's there and he's told, look, if you can master that chain, you can actually win really, really like flashy fights and people will love you and it'll be great. And then the patriarch, he'll like notice you and that'll be good. That'll be really good for you. And so he starts putting different things like weights and spikes on the ends of his chains to be able to like take people out. There's even parts where he's able to create these special links in the chain so that he can actually collar his enemies and like yank them, that kind of thing. So while all of that's happening, he also learns the Death Bloom spell. And while that's happening, Minot basically kind of just fades off, dies and all that. And Chainer goes under a new tutor named Skellum. And Skellum takes on like this paternal role with Chainer and kind of teaches him how to dementia cast. And dementia casting is where you basically take fear and give it manifested form as a nightmare. And so that's why his card has to do with like nightmares and stuff like that. So Skellum teaches him how to create a variety of terrifying things. And over time, he actually learns how to turn his chain, just make his chain out of nightmares so that he can actually like transmogrify it on the fly as opposed to having a specific kind of chain when he goes into it. So he really lives up to his name. So one day during his like training in the morning, stuff like that, he's exploring an old part of the city, right? And he's looking around at like these ruins, and there's this manor, like a giant mansion. And so he goes into the basement of the mansion, and in there he finds this orb, and it calls to him. Like he felt pulled to the mansion, and then he hears the call of the Mirari. The Mirari is this ancient artifact that was technically created as a probe by Karn, the Silver Golem, from the plane of Argentum before it became Mirrodin, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we're not going to get into that. There's a little taste. Tasty taste. So the Mirari basically guarantees that you can grant any wish you want. If you can dream it, it can become reality. And that's kind of the whole thing behind the Mirari. So he sees it, and the Mirari's like, use me. And he's like, I really wanna, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to do it because only the first, the Patriarch, is worthy of such power. And so he travels to the Patriarch's palace, and he obviously intends to deliver it, right? And so when he gets there, before he can get to the actual place, he's confronted by the Order. So the Cabal are basically like the black aligned group. The Order are the white aligned. You have the Barbarians, which are red. You have the Druids, which are green. And then you have the Cephalids, which are blue. Braids will tell us a little bit more about the Cephalids, but until then. So while this is happening, the Order basically stops him and are like, what do you got on you? And so he fights them off, and he contacts Skellum, and Skellum shows up and he saves him. And so Chainer's able to show the Patriarch, look, I got you this super rare artifact. And the Patriarch's like, well, that's really good, and I really appreciate this gift, and this is perfect. And so Chainer works under Skellum a bit more, and it gets to the point where the Patriarch feels that it's time. So by this point, the Patriarch loves Chainer, and he's like, look, you got me this super nice ball. It's huge. It's my favorite. I touch it all the time. And so Chainer starts talking to Cabal. He's told by the Patriarch, go to this barbarian, teach him the ways, because he's going to be a really good fighter. And so Chainer hates Cabal because Kamal's just this barbarian. And he's like, why would I care about this guy? I don't want to do this. I have better things to do with my time, like train. And while they're together, this dragon shows up and attacks the city. And so Cabal just kind of jumps straight for Chainer, and the two of them work together to fight off the dragon from looters, and to basically save the Mirari that was in a vault. And they even fight against a group of the Order, and they kill them, and they stop all this stuff from happening. Also, it's worth noting the Order has a limestone golem, which I thought was kind of cool. So after all this happens, in the aftermath, Lieutenant Kurtar, who's one of the leaders of the Order, actually steals the Mirari. And the Patriarch's like, look, I am sure the orb will return to us, as all our valuables do. And so Chainer resumes training. Cabal runs off and does his story, right? And so all this is happening, and he fights Jessica, he fights Balthor, and Chainer actually loses his right arm because Jessica hits him with this explosive bolt. And he gets, and instead, a golem arm, which is just super cool. And so he's able to use that golem arm basically for really strong melee attacks and stuff like that, that he normally wouldn't be able to use the arm for. So I love the idea of he's got one hand that just has nightmare chains and another one that is just pure stone. It's super cool. So then, while all that stuff is happening with Chainer, we go to Braids. And Braids is special because she's a dementia caster who has not lost her mind entirely. Most dementia casters that work with the Cabal can't do it for very long because the nightmares basically consume their brain and then they die. Or they just become babbling messes. But for some reason, she's so twisted already that it does not matter to her. So she's sent with several Cabalists to the Mer Empire, right? And so while she's there, she basically sees Emperor Aboshan. Emperor Aboshan is a Cephalid. Cephalids have not been shown really since this storyline, since this whole thing happened, because the big thing that they were trying to do with the Odyssey block was create an environment for creatures that had never been used before. So they felt like they were using elves and merfolk and goblins way too much. So that's where they introduced dwarves, cephalids, and Nantuko. They also introduced Bird as a common white creature, as opposed to stuff like angels. And then they use nightmares and minions and stuff like that instead of using like zombies. So the whole idea is Ataria was like its own continent, like in the corner, right? So while they're there, there's a guy named Laquatus. He's Ambassador Laquatus, and he's a merfolk, and he works for Emperor Abashan. And so they, at this point, the Mer Empire has control of the Mirari. Stuff happened with the Order and all this other stuff, and now it got into the hands of Emperor Abashan, who his desire is to sink a third of Ataria into the ocean. Basically annex it immediately under his control, right? So he does that. He sinks an entire third of a continent and kills himself in the process. So that happens. The Mirari is Braids takes it, and she actually is immune to it because of all the dementia visions she has. She's so insane that the orb does nothing to her. And so she pockets it and she heads back to the Cabal City to give it to the Patriarch. And so she winds up in the pits alongside Skellum, who is Chainer's mentor, right? They were put specifically together to fight against a squad of the Order. And the plan was that they were supposed to lose. And Skellum was supposed to die, because the Patriarch felt like Chainer no longer could learn anything from Skellum and was too attached to him. Because remember, Skellum was like a father figure. So he winds up just straight up killing Skellum in the pits. And while all of this is happening, she gets knocked out, she wakes up, and she starts having visions of Kuber. Now, Kuber is the dark god of the Cabal. And it's like this being. And it's trying to speak to her, basically, and to go to Afeto. And so all this stuff is happening with her, and she goes to Afeto, and she sees Laquatus, the Ambassador Laquatus, and he's like, you know what? We're going to work together with the Cabal, because during the time of everything that's been happening, let's jump over to Chainer. So Kamal returns with Chainer, and Chainer gets a vision of Kuber, and he's basically at the top of his game, right? And while this is all happening, Chainer actually gets a chance to use the Mirari. He gets to use it twice. The first thing he does is he heals Kamal, because Kamal got hurt, and he was really badly injured in this battle that happened, right? The second thing he does is create a thing for Ambassador Laquatus. There's a card called Cabal Champion. This was what he created specifically for Laquatus and all that stuff to happen. Because together they were able to get the Mirari, because the Mirari is just constantly tossing between hands. It's very chaotic. At one point, Kamal had it, and then the Patriarch has it again. And then Laquatus is like, hey, I want to get it from Kamal because Kamal has it again. And it just kind of keeps getting juggled back and forth because all of them are terrible people. Like that's the big problem, is that it's just a bunch of people who get tempted and then they fall to the temptation. And so it kind of gets tossed around a bit more. Kamal is burning his skin to get rid of all this stuff that's happening to him. Laquatus is super excited. And all this stuff takes place. And eventually, Braids, we're just going to talk about what happens to her real quick. Remember how in a previous episode we talked about Jessica and Phage, and then, of course, Jessica Thrice Reborn, that whole deal with the chroma and all that? So remember how I mentioned that Kamal was healed by the Mirari and then he burned himself? It was because as a warrior, he felt like he didn't deserve to be completely healed. He needed to have those scars to show that he had lost and to learn from them, kind of thing. And he kind of left and he did his own thing, and he went off into the woods, and that all happened. Then, of course, you had the Patriarch. And the Patriarch saw, remember how I told you that Chainer made Burke the Laquatus champion for Laquatus? Well, the Patriarch was like, I love that. Give me one. I want one. And so Chainer took the orb, and instead of doing what the Patriarch asked him to do, he said, you know what? You're the reason that the Skellum is dead. You put him in that rigged fight. You knew what was going to happen, and it's all your fault. And so he tries to kill the Patriarch. But it turns out the Patriarch is basically immortal because of a pact he had made with Kubert. So it didn't matter. So all this happens, and the Patriarch is defeated. Chainer becomes the new leader. Everyone's super excited. Chainer has control of everything, right? And as that's all happening, you also had, of course, Braids doing her thing. She loses her mind. That's literally the rest of her story, is she just loses her mind, trapped in her own dementia space, and then she's buried alive. That's it. Now, Chainer's story has a very sad ending. Because with Braids, she's basically evil the entire time. Uh-huh. And it makes sense that would be like her final defeat kind of thing, right?
Right.
But with Chainer, he was corrupted over time. And at this point, he has the Mirari. He's taken over the Mirari games. The Order shows up with 3 angels, and they're during the opening ceremony of these like new Mirari games he's going to have. And they're there specifically because Tarot and other Samites were killed. And Chainer's like, "What are you doing? I'm like the leader of the Cabal now, and I can do whatever I want because I have the Mirari." And so he puts all his power into the Mirari and taps into the dementia space of literally everyone else on Ataria. Basically, he taps into the fears of everyone. And it's like, that's insane. It's like the amount of fear that he has tapped into with the Mirari is unprecedented. And everyone starts dying because of everything he's doing. And Kamal's there, and he's like, Chainer, you have to stop doing what you're doing. Obviously. And Chainer's not having any of it. So what he winds up doing is Cabal basically melts his golem arm. He melts off Chainer's golem arm. And Chainer's like, you know what? I don't need it anyways. I can just grow it back with the Mirari. And so he reaches into the Mirari, and instead, his arm shoots out of his body, and it's like an insect arm, like a Nantuko arm. Mm-hmm. And then he breaks it off, and he redoes it, and instead it's just like a fleshy lump, like a tumor comes out of his body, and he redoes it again. And when he does it again, his entire body is just suddenly covered. So once that tumor thing shoots out of his body, he's like, you know what? I forget all you guys. I can do whatever I want. And so he used the Mirari to absorb every nightmare creature and to make himself part nightmare. And when he does it, he winds up actually just kind of fusing with these things in such an unstable, terrifying manner that he's just this mass that is useless. And he just kind of gurgles at Cabal. And of course, Cabal kills him because it's a mercy killing. All the horrors dissipate because obviously their summoner's gone, and that's his effect in the card. His original card, the original Chainer card, it was mono black, says you can just keep making nightmares, but when he dies, all the nightmares get removed. And at that point, the Mirari gets passed back on to Cabal, and then we go back to Kamal's story. But that's not about Cabal, and that's basically everything. And honestly, as far as the old Magic stories go, Odyssey is my least favorite Magic series. I know there are people that enjoyed it, but for me, it was super slow and convoluted, and it tried to follow too much, I think, and tried to do a little too many things between its characters. Obviously, there are people who it's their favorite, but for me, and I think I mentioned this when I was talking about the Cabal series, Cabal and Jessica one. It's just kind of like pick a plot and just run with that plot. Because it's more a story about how power corrupts, and that's cool and all. But I mean, I just want to see Magic fights happen, and I want to enjoy one story at a time.
If you want to enjoy one story at a time, go ahead and subscribe to our channel for more legendary lore, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.